to keep warm.
Wow.
I mean, it's really cold there, and everyone uses electric heaters when it gets cold, and they just fried the whole power thing.
Wow.
Well, so much for global warming, huh?
Yeah.
Texas is 5 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, share screen. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we are continuing. Uvimlo tayamim ha'ela, when those days became filled, which means to say, when he finished making 180 days a feast. This is the Gemara interpreting the Megillah, a feast for 180 days of the leaders from the whole community. He then made a 7-day feast for the people of Shushan, was the capital, and he had to ingratiate himself with them. So, and then those days were finished, the 180 days, the king made a feast for all the people that are present in Shushan, the capital. Now, Rav and Shmuel, throughout the discussion of the Megillah, argue if Achashverosh Melech Pikachaya, if he was smart, or Melech Tipesh, he was foolish. And we think Rav holds he was smart and Shmuel holds he was foolish, but since we're not so sure, we just say one said and one said. But one of them held that the king was smart, the other held he was foolish. So Rav and Shmuel, one said he was a smart king, one said he was a foolish king. The one who said he was a smart king, Shaper of it, he did a sensible thing. That he first made the party for all the satraps and leaders of all 127 countries. Because the
this time, so I have more to hold on to. It makes a huge difference.
Why? Because the people of his own city call Amos the boy Mafayaslu. Anytime he wants, he can make it up to them and make them a party. The one who said he was a fool, he first should have drawn close the people of his own city. Because if the further away people would rebel against him, they would support him. In other words, the further you are from the capital, the more likely people are to not feel the leash and to rebel. But if there's a rebellion, if your people of your own city rebel against you, you're in trouble. So at the very least, he first should have appeased by giving food and drink, making a big party for his own people. Because had there been a rebellion, he would have had sorrows. Okay.
What's this background noise?
I don't know. Okay. So throughout the discussion of the Megillah, Rav and Shmuel are going to argue as to whether he was a smart king or a foolish king.
Which king are we talking about?
3 guesses. We're interpreting the Megillah.
Oh, the Megillah, Achashverosh.
Yeah, right.
He was not one of the brightest kings ever.
That's a debate. It's a big debate. One holds he's very bright, one holds he's not so bright at all.
Really, I think this part.
From what we know from the Megillah, doesn't show his His big
Well, that's a
brains.
debate. According to Rav, he was very smart and organized. Anyways, Shol Talmid of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him a question. Mipna man ischayvu sonei Anshe Yisrael shebaota hador klaya. Why were the enemies of the Jews, which is a euphemism for the Jewish people, because we don't want to say bad things about the Jews, but why were the Jewish people liable to annihilation? What did they do that was so terrible that made them liable to Haman's decree? Amalehem. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said to them, you tell me. In other words, why don't you think about it? What do you think, basically? Amrulo. So they told him, because they partook of the feast of that wicked person. And in the Steinsaltz, it says they partook of forbidden foods. But it's actually not what the commentaries say. The commentaries say that Achashverosh gave them kosher food. As it says, Kiritzon ish v'ish, according to each person's desire, Haman and Mordechai. But because he stood there in the garments of the high priest that had been stolen from the Beit HaMikdash, and he defiled and insulted the temple and Hashem's temple, and the Jewish people didn't run away, but they stayed there because they thought that they had to make nice and appease him. They had to be better Persians than the Persians. So because of this, they were liable to annihilation. Asked Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's not a good enough answer. Imkain, if this is the case, Shebeshushan Yahargo, only those in Shushan should be killed. Why should all the Jews be killed? Only the Shushan Jews went to Achashverosh's evil feast. Shebechol olam kulal Yahargo, all the Jews in the rest of the world should not be liable to death. Amrulo, the student, said, since we don't have the right answer, and you are a wise teacher, and Morata, you tell us. Amalehem, he told them, because they bowed to the idol that Nebuchadnezzar made. Because if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar had all the Jews bow, all the people bowed to the idol, and only Hananiah, Mishael, and Isaiah did not bow to the idol, which indicates that everyone else did. So because of that, many said 20 odd years later, they became liable to destruction. Amar lo.
Rabbi, I find this piece very strange.
Let's just finish, Jojo. Wait, let's just finish the piece, then you'll ask. Amrulo, they said, is there favoritism by God in this matter? In other words, why would they be saved by a miracle? If they were liable to destruction for worshiping idols, they should have been destroyed. Why did Hashem save them? Amar lehem heim lo asa lifnim. The Jewish people only worshipped idols as an appearance. In other words, they only did it to fulfill the kid's command. But they didn't believe in the idols in the times of the first temple. When they worshipped idols, they did so out of conviction. And therefore, the temple was destroyed and most of them were killed. But in this case, because they didn't really believe in the idol, they had learned their lesson from the destruction of the temple, and they only did it because they felt forced by Nebuchadnezzar. So since it was only superficial, they didn't really mean it. God only superficially destroyed them. In other words, God only threatened them with destruction and then said, oh, I'm kidding. As it's written in Eicha, because he doesn't afflict from his heart willingly. In other words, God only scared them but didn't destroy them because just as their worship was superficial and they didn't mean it, so the destruction was superficial. It was a threat and God did not mean it. Mr. Singer, your question.
As I started saying, I find this approach to solving problem very strange. The first thing we do is blame ourselves. Maybe we did something wrong. Maybe we did this when we did that. All this discussion, not going after analyzing the whole problem. Why we are exposed like this? What are we supposed to be doing? What didn't we do? Instead, we look inside. Oh, maybe we did this. Maybe we did that. You know, this became almost like a a way of looking at ourselves for centuries.
Well, you know what? In this case, it's very clear that this was right, because this is what the sages did, and the sages speak with Ruach HaKodesh. Subject closed. Let's go on. Because, this
not an
argument
answer.
goes forever, Joe. Every time we learn a piece of Gemara like this, you ask this question.
Rabbi,
Yeah, I asked the question because it's, I don't know if I always did. I don't remember it that way. But,
Joe, this is
it's okay.
literally the 15th time you've asked this question. And
Well,
there's
I
no
guess I'll
answer,
be
because the
asking it
answer is this
again.
event. Joe, if you read the book of Yirmiyahu, it's very clear that in the Tanakh, we see the bad things that happen as being consequences of our bad choices. That is how the Tanakh looks at it. You want to look at things differently at different points in history, Gesundheit, but the Gemara is simply taking the approach of the Tanakh. It's the way it is.
Right. So in other words, that's
That's
just,
the Tanakh's approach.
but
The
this-
Gemara
but
is
this-
continuing with the approach of Yirmiyahu.
how can you not repeat it? Even what you're saying is true. How can you not repeat it if this is the way we look at ourselves? And we know that it's a problem
Well,
and
it's
nobody is
very clear.
addressing it.
Look, it's very clear that in the generation before the story of Achashverosh, the fact is the Jews worshipped idols. In other words, it's really very simple, Joe. And we've discussed this in the
Yeah,
past,
yeah.
but I'll reiterate it for those present and watching online. Sometimes it's very clear that we have no reason or explanation for what happens. But we do have an obligation when trouble comes upon us, as the Rambam says, as Maimonides says, to question our deeds. So since the sages of the Talmud knew that the Jewish people fasted and repented during the Purim story, and they knew they worshipped the Nebuchadnezzar's idol, except for Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah. So based on the way the Nevi'im work, it's extremely logical to assume that this was a punishment for worshiping the idol, and that their repentance saved them. This is a pattern that we see throughout the Tanakh. Does this mean that every disaster to strike the Jewish people, which is really your question, Joe, it is because we sinned? Not necessarily. But in this case, it was. That's why I said case closed. In this case, the sages clearly saw it as being a consequence of worshiping idols. Does that mean that we should look at other disasters and say that we sinned? That when there's trouble in Israel or so on, should we say that we sinned? No, we shouldn't say that we sinned.
We are like setting ourselves up because later on Christianity made a big deal about it. All it was is looking at us and saying, look, that's what you predicted yourself. That's what you're learning from your own sources.
Well, to some extent, it's true. And it's not always true. So there's different reasons for different things at different times. Depends on the time. But in this time, this is true. Later in history, may not be true. The Gemara doesn't tell us about later in history. Okay.
Sure.
So what happens next?
Rabbi, a question.
Certainly.
Where was Mordecai at the time? When was he born yet? During the time of Nebuchadnezzar?
Right. So I do not believe the Gemara asked the question. It could be the Medrash asked it, and apparently Mordecai in his youth, that's the whole story with Haman, was a officer in the in the king's army. I don't know. Mordechai was exiled from Jerusalem, so he certainly was alive. He may have been on a mission somewhere else, because Daniel also wasn't there at the idol worshiping episode, because he was on a mission from the king. So maybe Mordechai was also on a mission from the king. That would be the assumption.
Thank you.
So we continue. Bachatzar ginat bitan hamelech, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So Rav and Shmuel once again disagree. Chad Omar, one says, presumably Rav, because the garden and the courtyard and the bitan is Persian for orchard. There's a garden, an orchard, and a courtyard. They're three different places. So what does it mean, the courtyard of the garden of the orchard? Even though he's missing orchard here. Rav and Shmuel disagreed. Chad Omar, one says, Haroy l'chotzer. The one who belonged in the court was in the courtyard. The one who was fitting to be in the garden was in the garden. The one who was fitting to be in the orchard or the palace were in the palace. It depended how important you are. It depended how many contributions you made to Achashverosh's campaign fund. Chad Omar, one said, Hoshivan b'chotzer. First, he brought everyone into the courtyard. V'lo ezekitan. There was an overflow crowd, free food, free wine, begina. So then he put them in the garden. And it wasn't enough until he brought them into the palace or into the orchard. And then there was enough room. B'matnisa Tana, in the Braita we learned, Hoshivan b'chatzer, first he put them in the courtyard and he opened two doors, one to the garden and one to the orchard. Chor, karpas, utchelas. There were hangings of chor, karpas, and tchelas. What is chor? Rava machare chare. It's lace curtains. The Shmuel says melas levana, fine white wool carpets to sit on, because they used to sit on the floor, or low couches. Omar Rabbi Yossi Bechanina, karim shel pasim, cushions of velvet. That's what karpas is. Doesn't mean celery. It means cushions of velvet. So he's showing off his wealth. Al-Glile Kesef, and the lace curtains were on silver rods, Amudei Sheish, and the rods were held up by pillars of marble. And Mitos, the low couches, were made of gold and silver. Tanya, we learned in the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda says, those who were worthy of silver got silver couches. Those who were worthy of gold got gold couches. Amalei Rab Nechemia, you're going to make people jealous instead of enjoying the meal. Hey, why did you get a gold couch? I gave money to you too. So Rabbi Nechemia gives another alternative explanation. Eloheim shel kesef. All the couches were made of silver, but their feet were made of gold. So they were made of gold and silver. And we're describing Achashverosh's enormous wealth and how he opened it up. He was clever in the sense he shared the wealth with the people. Bahat v'sheish.
So usually you would think if you have gold and silver, that the legs and the bottom part of it would be silver, and the one you lay on and all that would be gold. So
No.
here is pink for draped.
And the answer is, Joe, because gold is more expensive than silver.
Yes.
And because gold is more expensive than silver.
Good morning.
No.
No.
Good. How are you?
Because gold is more expensive than silver. So you can't afford to make the whole couch out of silver. But the legs, we make out of gold to make him look cool. Even Achashverosh had limits to his wealth. Bahat v'sheish. Bahat and marble. So Rav Asi says, Bahat avonim shemischotetos al baleim. They ingratiate themselves with their owners. In other words, they were beautiful, precious stones. And so it says in Zechariah, Avnei Nezer, crown stones, glittering over his land, describing the wealth of the Jewish people in the Messianic era. V'dar v'sochares, dar and sochares. So Rav said, dore. There were rows and rows of couches because there are lots of people in Shushan. And Shmuel says, Evan tov yesh b'chrakei hayam. In the cities across the sea, there is a beautiful stone, and it's called Dara. And he put it in the middle of the meal, and it illuminated them like the sun. Maybe it was a huge diamond or a big radioactive rock. The Vei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, Shekara Dor l'chol barei schora. He gave freedom to all the businessmen. He gave them freedom from taxes. That all, no tariffs, no taxes, tax holiday, sales tax holiday. And that made them happy.
What's the point of this? There must be something we learned from this.
Well, what do you think we learned from it?
That's a very good question. That's what I asked. I asked it first.
Does anyone want to volunteer a thought as to what we learned from this? Anyone? You can unmute yourself and tell me.
One thing we learned is what a nut Achashverosh was.
Right. But also, in essence, how clever he was to ingratiate himself with everyone. In other words, we're describing his great wealth and the way he went to make himself popular. So that's why when he said to kill all the Jews, everyone went along because he was popular. And the other point is that we're making, I think, with all this, is to describe what a wealthy and powerful empire this was. So if they sought to destroy the Jewish people, they would have a good chance of success. And that's the whole thing, to describe the incredible wealth. And also Achashverosh's willingness, in a sense, to show everyone how wealthy and powerful he was. Now, the Malbim, Reb Leibish Malbim, who wrote in the mid to late 19th century, says that what Achashverosh was doing here is he was a populist. He was appealing to the people over the heads of the aristocracy. If you remember, we discussed earlier that when the king was from Persia, the aristocracy was from Media and vice versa. So, but which meant that Achashverosh was constrained by the aristocrats. It was an oligarchy. So the Malbim explains that Achashverosh was trying to change himself from a limited government in which the nobles had power to an unlimited government. He wanted to be the absolute ruler, the absolute dictator. And the way to do that is to get the masses on your side. And therefore, he made this huge party and was showing the incredible wealth and the incredible splurging he did on the people in order to impress them and get them on the side. He said, listen, come to me and let me be the only ruler. I'm going to make it good for you. I'll reduce your taxes and I'll give you all kinds of goodies, but we have to get rid of these other people. In other words, cut them out, make me the absolute ruler.
I'm learning another lesson here.
Good, Joe, go ahead, let's hear.
That all of this is foretelling the coming destruction of the Persian Empire. You're getting soft, you keep on talking about richness and how great you are, and you're forgetting the basics, what made you so powerful, and somebody else was coming and eating your lunch. And that's exactly what's happening in history, over and over and over again.
As a matter of fact, about 20 years after this, Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire. So yeah, you're right.
Exactly. There is.
Rabbi, there were two parties. The first one was for the ministers and the second one was for the people?
Right. And basically, he first wanted to get all the important leaders and ministers to like him. And then he'd spring the trap and get the people on his side and say, look, you make me in charge, it'll be better for the ministers and better for the people. Give me absolute power and I'll do great things for you. Which is mostly how things work. Ashkos Beklei Zahav, and they gave him golden vessels. Mikalim Shonim, all different vessels. So the Gemara says we should be Meshunim, bizarre, weird. Omer Rava, in other words, Yotza Sabaskova Amru. Mishonim, the earlier ones, Belshazzar, were destroyed Mipnei Keli because of the vessels, because he brought out the vessels of the temple and put them on the tables. And you're drinking wine. Vatum Shonabem, you're doing it again. And this, by the way, is a reference to what Joe said. God is warning Achashverosh, in the end you will fall. V'yeya Malchus Rav, because Darius III was Achashverosh's son, and he was wiped out by Alexander. And lots of good wine. Amar Rav, this teaches us that everyone was given wine that was older than him in years. So if you were 70, they found a fine 70-year-old vintage for you. If you were 100, they gave you a 101-year-old. So everyone was given, to show his wealth, everyone was given wine in accordance with their passport.
Was that Darius was also Esther's son?
Some say yes, some say no. According to some, we'll see later, she may have been Mordechai's son, as we shall see. Vashtia Kadat, and the drinking was according to the law. Eino Nes, no one was compelled. My Kadas, according to the law. So here we get to the point that Achashverosh gave them kosher food. But because they sat there and gazed upon the abuse of the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash and did not mourn its destruction, they were punished. Rabbi Chanan Mishum Rabbi Meir says, Kedosh shel Torah, according to the law of Torah. So some say this means according to that it was kosher for the Jews. Another interpretation is Madah shel Torah, what is the way of the Torah? Achila meruba mishtia, that the food brought on the altar is more than drink, right? There's a lot more sacrifices than libations. So the meal of that wicked person is eating more than drinking. As much as they drank, there were piles and piles of food. Lots of sushi. Okay. Ain't ones. None did compel. What does it mean, none did compel? Everyone was given from wine of his own country, so he should feel comfortable and at home. Lassos kritzon ish v'ish, to do according to every man's pleasure. Amarava lassos kritzon Mordechai v'Haman. Mordechai is ish, because ish Yehudi, and Haman is called ish tsar v'oyev. What does that mean? It meant that they gave kosher food and kosher wine to the Jews and non-kosher food to the non-Jews. Now, I should point out, because sometimes you can have kosher food, but everything else isn't so kosher. Like the so-called kosher cruises, where there's all kinds of other things going on that aren't so kosher, even though the food is kosher. Gam Vashti Hamalka.
Rabbi, it said here in the English that Mordechai was a butler. I thought he didn't go to the feast.
That's according to one opinion. According to the other opinion, he had him come so he should serve kosher wine. But it's true, later it says that he didn't go to the feast. So it's a debate. We don't know exactly what happened. There are two opinions on the matter. Good point, Michael. But it's a good point. But it could be that, because here's the thing. If wine is poured by a non-Jew, it's not kosher. So I guess the king wanted his most important Jew to go around pouring out the wine. Maybe he wasn't there for the fashion show when Achashverosh put on the garments of the high priest. That's a possibility.
Achashverosh really cared whether the wine was kosher, or he thought they wouldn't drink it otherwise?
He thought they wouldn't drink it otherwise.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you said that the wine the age of the wine was according to the age of the person.
Yep.
So what about Manischewitz?
I don't think it existed then.
Oh, there was always a Manischewitz. They just called them something else. First of all, from my own experience, I can tell you that that they were serving the people their wine from their country to make them comfortable is not the best idea, and people don't really like it. I know from my own experience. The first day I came to United States, the next day was Motzei Shabbos. My cousin takes me to this famous Broadway restaurant where all the big shots used to meet, and they ordered for me matzah balls and soup and all that. And I thought to myself, that's what I came to United States. I ran away from it from my mother, and here I come to United States, and instead of ordering
Yeah, that's Jews.
American,
Yussel.
I'm getting the same thing.
Yussel. Jews
Yeah.
are cosmopolitans. Jews are citizens of the world. Normal people like what comes from their country. We're just weird. Okay. Okay, so we're going to learn about Vashti tomorrow. I wish everyone a most wonderful day. And
Yes.
we'll see. We're going to study the weekly Torah portion, 15-minute fast lunch and learn at 12:30. Take care, everyone.
What are we doing tonight?
Tonight is the big idea.
Do we have a big idea for tonight?
It's a surprise.
Oh, okay. Has to do
Surprise.
something with Purim.
Probably. But exactly what we're going to talk about, we're essentially, well, actually, I'll tell you already. We're going to talk about wine and intoxication in Judaism, how Judaism looks at intoxication and at wine and so on. Take care, everyone.